if Putler is Hitler, then there would have been a no-fly zone over Ukraine, and nukes would be flying all over the place. We're in a holding pattern as things get worse and worse every day for Ukrainians, as people basically forget about Ukraine altogether, partially because we are too busy funding a genocide in Israel. Donald Trump has never de-escalated anything. As I reiterated many, many times over, the only reason why the Iranian situation did not become worse when Trump assassinated Qasem Soleimani was restraint from the Iranian side. That's it. For one reason or another. But things could have gotten significantly worse. I guess COVID kind of was a factor. But the idea that like Donald Trump would be de-escalatory in the Middle East is a silly one. My criticisms of Joseph Robinette Brandon revolve around his continuation of Trump's foreign policy. I guess with the one exception, yes, DPRK relations, Donald Trump was actually decent with that. That's true. Something that I readily admit. I'm curious at what point you would say some sort of military response is warranted. I don't know. I am a firm believer in de-escalation and diplomacy. So there are very few. No. I understand that. I think your question is valid. I think that there are very few instances where like military escalation is not warranted. I think military action is fine as long as it is a defensive posture. That's an understandable thing, right? You're not supposed to sit back and expect the larger superpower to come and destroy you, or even the smaller power to come and attack you. But I think that that's it. It's like the offensive capabilities, in my opinion, are oftentimes just completely unacceptable. Now, having said that, there are obvious exceptions to this rule, but that would be like state-on-state violence, or that would be like a Hitler-style situation. You know what I mean? Now, if we're making a comparison in modern day to a Hitler-style situation or a state engaging in this sort of thing, I don't know. I just Israel comes to mind, or Saudi Arabia comes to mind with its actions in Yemen, or UAE comes to mind with its actions in Yemen. But I don't believe in like physically and forcibly bringing them to heel in that situation either. Russia is another example as well. But like Ukraine's defensive posturing is totally valid. I've said this since day one, that yes, Ukraine, of course, has a right, a duty, and a moral responsibility to defend itself. But that is a defensive posture. There are instances where like military action is understandable, but in many of the cases where America is involved, because it is the global hegemonic superpower that dominates the entire planet, that has its fingers in everything that's going on, I feel like you gave up on Ukraine aid, so I think you would give up on aiding other countries. No. I said that Ukrainian aid should be conditional. I think that part of the reason why Ukraine continues to fight is because the United States of America does not tell them like, okay, we have to make sure that we avoid further conflict that will end up killing a ton more people. And by that, it's not even conditional. It's more so saying like, I think that the United States of America controls what level, like what bandwidth Ukraine has. This is true. It doesn't matter if you disagree with me or not. It doesn't matter what you say about like Ukrainians and their own autonomy and their own personal beliefs and their own personal expectations. If Ukrainian needs were actually the emphasis in this conversation, then there would be a no-fly zone over Ukraine that is implemented and controlled by NATO forces, right? But no such thing exists. It doesn't exist because obviously there are limitations to what kind of help we will offer Ukraine. And our motivations has been quite clear. As far as Ukraine goes, our motivations here in the United States of America have been quite clear since the beginning. It is to just tell Ukraine, oh, we're going to do everything. We're going to do everything for you. We're going to do everything for you. Trust me. Just keep going. Keep fighting. Keep fighting. Keep fighting. Keep fighting. And then not really offering Ukraine the help it wanted and basically writing it off as though this is a phenomenal, this was a phenomenal return on investment. We pulled, and I said this back then as well, We pulled the same that we did with the Kurds. America does this all the time. The United States of America does this all the time. If you were to think that the United States of America actually has a consistent moral position and isn't just simply using sometimes righteous causes for their own ends, because Ukraine defending itself is a righteous cause, is a just cause, is the moral one. But America's involvement and America's interest in Ukraine is not a righteous cause, no matter how hard they try to present it that way. But America consistently claiming, like, we got your back, don't worry about it, do your thing, was genuinely devastating for Ukraine. It just like it heated up the conflict further, and Russia took over even more territory as a consequence. In that they were able to like successfully push into eastern territories and plant themselves there. Are you saying it is not righteous because it's not enough? Wait, what? No, Ukrainians and their emancipatory needs are just. America's interest in the continuation of funneling weapons or funding Ukrainian defense is not for just reasons. What do I mean by this? If their goal was truly to avoid as many, if their goal was to genuinely stop the bleeding, stop the harm, stop Ukrainians from dying en masse, then they would do everything they can to immediately come to the table and try to pressure the parties that they can to specifically put forward a ceasefire and contemplate how a peaceful cessation of hostilities can happen. But in every single circumstance, everyone was like, well, you can't trust Russia. They would never do that. Yes, let's appease the Russians. Okay, well, if that's if the opposite of appeasement is awarment, then you're just, going to continue pushing Ukrainians to the fucking meat grinder. I don't see you going out there to fight. Americans personally say openly, American representatives personally say openly, guess what, dude? Ukraine was phenomenal for us. For 5% of our military budget, we were able to cripple a foreign adversary's entire military. We were able to erode 50% of their military without a single active U.S. service member dying in the process. I'd say that's a phenomenal investment. That is something that Elizabeth Warren has alluded to. That is something that Lindsey Graham has talked about.
Big support, very important.
The best money we've ever spent.
Thank you so much.
No, it's, we're on this is 457th day of a war that was supposed to last 3 days.
Yeah.
You amaze me. Your country amazes me.
Now you are free.
Yes.
And we will be.
And the Russians are dying.
Yes, but they came to our territory.
Yeah.
We are not fighting on their territory.
It's over. It's not like they're hiding it. They're openly saying it. They're openly flexing it. And the conversation is also ridiculous because guess what, dude? Here's the other side of the story. You say backing off didn't work in 2014. Well, it worked in favor of not as many Ukrainians dying in that sense. If your goal is to hopefully stop the bleeding, and if your goal is to see what happens, giving peace a shot is always the best thing to do. People always go, oh, this is appeasement. This is appeasement. Russia is a Hitlerite nation. Okay, they're behaving like Adolf Hitler. They're behaving like Adolf Hitler. They're behaving like Adolf Hitler, and they must be met. Okay, go fight then. Then what you're supposed to do is like go full blown. If it's Adolf Hitler, then you should be America, right? The fuck are we doing? What's happening? Go full force. Why half measures? Or maybe in a post-nuclear Holocaust world that we live in, there are no more Adolf Hitlers in the same vein, and you can't really fight against it in the same way. Like, do you understand? Do you get what I'm saying? What about statements by Ukrainian officials about an attack on Russia 4 months before the start of hostilities, threats of atomic weapons? NATO promises to set up combat posts on the borders with Russia, and NATO representatives ignoring an official letter from Russia to not make Ukraine a springboard for NATO. Yeah, I mean, I've talked about all of this stuff. I've talked about all of this leading up to Russia's invasion. Russia's invasion of Ukraine completely eviscerated that. Russia already maintained Crimea. There was already LPR and DPR and the ongoing conflict there. This all rendered Ukraine's involvement with NATO to be an impossibility. So it was already like a Georgia style situation. Like none of this matters. Once they invaded, it was done. It was Jover. I'm Russian with Ukrainian relatives. The whole circus is just an incredible meat grinder of innocent people. Yeah, you can't join NATO with border disputes anyway. I've talked about the Western world and Western powers dangling NATO involvement with respect to Ukraine as a carrot in front of the Ukrainian government in a way to like put pressure on Russia, for example, and how fucked up that is.
In Bucharest this week, I will continue to make America's position clear. We support MAP for Ukraine and Georgia. Helping Ukraine move toward NATO membership is in the interest of every member in the alliance and will help advance security and freedom in this region and around the world.
But once Russia actually ate the bait and legitimately invaded Ukraine, it's over. It's done. You have now legitimized NATO in 2024. It is the dumbest thing you can possibly do. It's always odd to me that a lot of people who love China also sometimes love Russia and Russian actions. They push Z, if you will. And what I never understand about those people is that, like, dude, even if you're like pro-Russian dominance, so you like love Russia's irredentist actions or anything like that, this is a major misstep. This is a insane flub. It's not only super bloody and super violent, it's also just completely unimaginably a bad idea. It was so bad it emboldened NATO's existence. It showed the other countries that Russia previously had like a handshake agreement on neutrality, like Finland and Sweden, that they could now join NATO. It was just, it was awful. It's so dumb. There is no way to try and justify this as an objective good. I think Russia knew all that, but Ukraine is much more important than Finland and Sweden because of Black Sea access. Yes, but there's a difference between Crimea and Eastern Ukrainian territories is what I mean. That's why I make this distinction all the time. One that people get very, very mad at me about. But yeah, Ukraine's democracy in darkness. Oh God, they're back. They're going to write the same articles they wrote about how Zelensky is corrupt. And once again, now that like Ukraine is on the back burner. I think Russia had legitimate security concerns vis-a-vis NATO, but now no one's going to listen because they invaded Ukraine. Yeah, I mean, it was over at that point, dude. There's nothing you can do. There's no rhyme or reason. It's not smart. It's not good. People can cope and try to be like, no, actually, like Putin is chess master. Look at how much more territory it conquered. Oh, sick, dude. It's awesome. Yeah, it's a pretty insightful article. Yeah, I've read that article all the way from 2014 to 2018, exactly, as this chatter mentioned. I've read that exact same article so many times over. There was a valid argument against NATO after what they did in Serbia against the wish of the UN. Now they gave NATO a valid boogeyman. NATO has never really been a protective institution. It had one purpose. And after the dissolution of the USSR, its purpose was supposed to be done. But the obvious purpose wasn't just to destroy communism globally, but it was also to maintain American capitalism as the dominant force. And we have done that, and we will continue doing that. The worst possible thing you can do is basically give credence to the idea that like it must exist as a defensive force. You know what I mean? How many NATO countries has Russia invaded? Would say it works out pretty good. Yeah, dude. That's why I always keep my elephant mace right next to me. After all, how many elephants are attacking me on a daily basis? 0. Like, get the fuck out of here. Yeah, NATO is so good. I love it. That's why, like, think about current Libya. What an awesome place. Thank God for NATO. Libya is not in NATO. Don't be daft. Wait, what? That's so funny that you said Libya is not in NATO. I know. Yeah, Libya is not in NATO. There you go. No-fly zone for Libya. Look how well that panned out.
So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, I'm sure it did.
Anyway, as far as like talking about Ukraine and all this stuff, I don't know how the fuck I got here. I don't know how I got here. I don't know what I was talking about. Debate lords derailed you. They want to avoid talking about Jover. Yeah. Well, Ukraine is also a bit, the responsibility of Jover too. Obviously, the major responsible party here is definitely. Oh, is there a time when military action is justified? Is how we got here. Thank you for keeping me on message and on point, Elite News. As far as Ukraine goes, I am an advocate for cessation of hostilities, just like the same principle holds for Palestine. We're not going to fully dive into all the things that are wrong historically with NATO, you know, beyond the couple different examples that I just mentioned here. As far as like military action goes, or as far as like what America could have done in Ukraine, we could have been a little bit more realistic with like what our genuine goals are, and pressured Ukrainian authorities to be like, listen, we have to very quickly nip this in the bud. Bring together multiple countries from the European allegiance, from NATO countries, to the table alongside Ukraine as a representative of Ukraine. Bring China and Russia on the other side, and create terms and conditions for a manageable ceasefire. This was kind of initiated in Antalya, as I've talked about before, a couple months into the invasion. It fell apart, and since then, thousands more have died. And the meat grinder, obviously, Ukrainian civilians, but also certainly Russian conscripts and Ukrainian soldiers as well. And now that meat grinder is getting to a point where, you know, there is not enough human beings to throw into that meat grinder on the Ukrainian side. Still, people in Ukraine are fighting against the Russian dictatorship. Why should they have to live under a dictator that has been killing them? Wait, what? I don't think they should. I don't know what I don't believe that at all. My point always has been, if Russia doesn't abide by the standards of a ceasefire, you put forward conditions that are that have to be met. You continue with the war. You continue backing Ukraine. That's what we've been doing since day one anyway. Why not see if there is a way to engage with Russia and implement a ceasefire? It makes no sense. Ukraine was not exactly in a good situation before the Russian invasion, and it's only gotten significantly worse. Doubtful. Think Russia really wants to annex it, even though that is impossible? Okay, but if that's the case, then you just go back to step one that we're at already. Does that make sense? An international council has already been collected in 2014 in Minsk regarding Ukraine. Germany and France legitimized the agreement. Only then, in 2021, Merkel admitted that it was going to give the Ukrainians time to prepare for war with Russia. Okay, but what I've mentioned as far as the Minsk agreement is that there will come a day when we look back from the future. I don't know what Ukraine will look like at that point. I don't know what Russia will look like at that point, but we will look back at that and go, holy imagine if we were able to force Ukraine and Russia to abide by the Minsk agreements. One or two, doesn't matter. Think about the unimaginable death toll and the destruction that one of Eastern Europe's poorest countries has withstood. And it's also odd that we have this conversation still. By the way, Russia also did not abide by the agreements. Yes, I know. But you know who else didn't abide by the agreements? Ukraine. That's what I'm saying. As long as Ukrainians are willing to fight, we should support them as much as we can. Okay, well, here's what's going to happen. It's already happening. What's going to happen is already happening. You're going to see less and less interest in Ukraine and less support for Ukraine. And Ukraine is going to go the way of the areas that are still controlled by the Western sphere of influence backed Ukrainian government are going to be picked apart piecemeal for Western capitalists. And sure, there will be some money opportunities there, but a tremendous amount of exploitation. And then the rest of it will be annexed by Russia in a permanent war situation. That's what's going on right now. Do you think this is good? It doesn't matter what we say and what we think in this situation. America's going to do what America does anyway. But if you want to hear what my perspective is on this matter, that's what I think. That's what I believe. I think that it's much better to have been as realistic with Ukraine right now as we are right now many months ago. At which point, every single person that died in that time frame would not have died. I agree with you, but if Ukrainians don't want that, what can we do? You have debated these folks. They will not move an inch. I know that. I understand that. So good luck to everybody, okay? That's it. If you ask my perspective, that's my perspective. If you are like, no, you don't understand, like, we have to abide by their interests because this is the moral position. Well, if it was about morality and if it was genuinely about killing Hitler, if Putler is Hitler, then there would have been a no-fly zone over Ukraine and nukes would be flying all over the place. We're in a holding pattern as things get worse and worse every day for Ukrainians, as people basically forget about Ukraine altogether, partially because we are too busy funding a genocide in Israel. One of the main issues on the other side in achieving a lasting ceasefire is also Russia and its objectives not being met, such as the full annexation of 4 oblasts, which is not currently achieved, and which will mean they are not interested in a ceasefire anytime soon, as highlighted by Russian officials in the last few weeks. But I understand the logic. It's sad people brand you as a pro-Russia when you suggest such things. Yeah, it's just ultimately, no matter what our framework is here with Ukraine, Ukraine is going to go whichever way it's going, and America is going to offer less and less support as the posturing whittles away, and all of those pro-Ukrainian Andes, basically all those pro-Ukrainian Andes will slowly but surely take the Ukrainian flag out of their bios. It's already happened. 90% of OSINT Twitter just like moved away from Ukraine almost entirely and moved into Israel, Palestine, or Venezuela for a little bit because they thought like Venezuela was going to invade Guyana or something. You know, they're just moving away. They're moving away from Ukraine. It's no longer the sexy thing to cover. It happened literally very publicly, okay? It happened in the most like in the wildest way possible. My point is almost every single thing that I've said with respect to Ukraine and Russia, with the exception of Russia will never invade Ukraine. That's a insanely foolish choice. Has been correct. And America is responding in the most predictable ways possible. This is how it always works. I was talking about the same thing in the beginning, how Ukraine was going to be bought up for pennies on the dollar, and domestic and foreign policy being dictated and trade policy dictated by America to Ukraine. The response, like I called the tanky and Votnik, whatever the F that means law, and basically Zelensky was going to be used as a rag to wipe the blood off the new goodies. Sorry to put it that way, shaking my head. Don't you think we needed to weaken Russia and strengthen NATO as well as weaken Iran in preparation for our future looking at East as per new American military directives? What do you mean we? No, I don't think we need to weaken Russia and strengthen NATO and weaken Iran in preparation for our war with China. I don't think that at all. Everything you have said about Israel and Palestine has been correct. Yes, everything, including JDAMs. Everything. As an on-the-ground reporter, everything I've said has been true. I'm in Gaza right now. Putin has also said that they have no interest in a ceasefire now and that the war will be decided on the battlefield. Yeah, sure. I don't know. I can't speak for Putin's aspirations, but that shouldn't stop people from, or shouldn't stop governments from trying to manage the conflict in a way that is more positive, in a way that will avoid further deaths. That's my point. If that makes sense to you, I hope it does. Let's get back to Biden maxing. Let's do it. Biden is doing what is called conflict maxing, where in an election year, you choose to do as much damage as you possibly can to your own polls and to use like the resources that the American military has in opening up new avenues of conflict, hopefully to defend your important ally doing a genocide.